Hello everyone, welcome to the 6th week of this course. Today we will be discussing about perception, cognition and sensorial modalities in this particular week, and we will first start with visual perception and design. So the key learning outcomes of this particular lecture is I will explain how the eye actively samples the world through shades, fixations and the fovea, and why vision is constructive and not camera-like. Apply principles of color, contrast and visual hierarchy to design choices that respect accessibility and cultural meaning. Translate the perception research into user research tactics that surfaces what users actually see, miss and assume. So how vision works? The human eye does not passively receive images like a camera. You take a camera, you click a picture, it will click everything which is in the frame. Instead, our eyes, it actively samples the visual environment through sachets, so quick eye movement and fixation, brief pauses at certain places. The fovea, the center of vision, has highest resolution but covers only approximately 2 degrees of visual angle. The brain fills in gaps and is easily fooled by visual illusions. So design must account for active and this constructive vision. So if you have already heard about Gestalt law, then good and fine. Otherwise, let's look at how our brain organizes the visual information that it perceives. So the first one is about proximity. So here you can see it is without proximity. So it is difficult for me to understand how to group them. Still, even when you look at it, you are still able to mentally see some kind of grouping. But let's say I have grouped them in this particular way. So because of the proximity, I see that this is one group, this is second group, this is third group. Here the way it is being designed, I see this as a certain group and I see there is a gap, and this is another group following the same pattern with a gap over here. So elements that close together are perceived as a group. We use spacing to organize related content. Elements far apart seem unrelated. Now similarity, grouping by appearance. So if you look at this particular thing, there is not much similarity over there. If I look at that grouping, it seems like it is a group of certain kind of shapes and certain kind of colors. Now here you can see I have grouped them by similarity. Okay, the top belongs to everything which is blue and everything which is circle and so on. So elements that look alike, same in terms of color, shape or size, are perceived as related. Ensure visual consistency. Breaking patterns communicates the difference. Now continuation. Here you can see that there is no such continuation, right? These are a set of dots. Eyes follow smooth lines and curves. Aligned elements guide attention. So what it makes me feel that, yeah, this is still a line. This is still a line. You can notice that over here, I have a different shape over here. So even though there was, the shapes are changing from here to here, I can still feel that there is a smooth line and there is a curve. So aligned elements guide attention. Visual flow that continues smoothly feels natural and breaks feel jarring. So here you can see that there is a different shape, but still if I look at it, I am still feeling that there is a continuation. Closure. There is no closure over here. There is a closure over here. However, our brain completes this partial visible shape also as a square and this also as a circle. So the white space and the implied shapes work together. They don't need to show everything explicitly. So logo space understood through this gaps also. Now coming to Gestalt's next 4 laws. What it says is the figure and ground. So what it implies is when you see, this is a kind of a foreground and background. This is another kind of foreground and background. In the first example, the foreground and background is a weaker combination because of lower contrast. In the second one, there is a lot of contrast, so the foreground and the background are separated. So, however, in both the concepts, we can still see there is a difference between the foreground and the background. So the ability to distinguish objects, the figure and the background, the ground, is again a mental construct. So I can have a strong one or I can have a weak one. So you have to allow sufficient contrast in order for us to notice the foreground and the background. Multiple figures compete for attention. So say for example there is a problem over here much larger because the contrast is quite low over here. Now coming to symmetry and balance. So symmetrical design feels stable and organized, and asymmetrical design feels dynamic and energetic. Choose based on what desired emotional effect you are looking at it. So say for example, I have here which says our services design, develop and launch. And here I have again our services design, develop and launch. In this particular context, I have different kinds of colors. Here I have similar color and here there is a different color. So just because of the differences in color, I will notice this launch more clearly. And my aim over here in the second one was to emphasize launch, because the entire asymmetry over there gives a huge importance to this whole event of launching. Whereas in this particular context, because of the color differences which is coming in every one of them, I feel that the color is just a design feature and my brain balances this out. Now coming to visual hierarchy. So arrange elements by importance. Size, larger size is more important. So when I say new features released, that is much larger as compared to others, that gives a certain degree of importance. Herein everything seems to be having the same importance. If you use color, so more saturated color means more importance. If you are using position, then top left is always considered as more important or the first thing to notice, and the center is again something the primary area to notice. Now coming to the last one, which is about the focal point. The brightest, largest and most saturated contrasting element on your entire screen will draw your attention first. So use one primary focal point per screen rather than trying to have lots of focal point. So you can see even on this particular screen, just because of the fact the way in which orange has been used on this last column, this is the place where your attention will go first and you will also spend more time over there. So now coming to using these aspects, visual perception and how color vision happens. So humans have three types of cone cells sensitive to short, the blue, medium, green and long red wavelengths. Color perception is relative. Same color looks different on different backgrounds. So there is this simultaneous contrast. Warm colors, the red, orange and yellow, appear to advance, and cool colors, blue, green and purple, appear to recede back from the plane on which it is placed. The design implications of this. So the color associations are partly biological. So red is about warming up and partly cultural, white about purity in west, death in east. So color use must consider accessibility, the color blindness aspect of it, the emotional associations and the color cultural meanings that the color holds for where I am putting that design. Try to have a limited color palette, so like 3 to 5 dominant colors, because they make the whole interface feel more coherent than too many colors. Now coming to visual perception and why it matters for user research. So the whole idea is a stimuli has to be perceived and not just seen. So that's where the difference between a camera and a human eye is. A camera will click or whatever is in its visible range, whatever it sees. Whereas for human eyes, it is not about seeing, it is about perceiving. So Gestalt grouping and visual hierarchy shape how participants interpret a prototype before they reason about it. So let's say I have a 3 pricing tier in a row read as a comparison set before users read the prices. So I will put one price here, another price here and another price here. And then I will make them select. Okay, so there are XYZ categories here, and then there are more categories here and more categories here. In this way, what I'm trying to make them see first. Is it the pricing? Definitely the pricing. And then I might write over here basic, professional, enterprise. So I also want them to make this decision easily. So I will place them together in this particular fashion. So people read, okay, this is one group, this is the next group. So when you are trying to design a prototype for testing with users, you have to look at how are you going to put it up so that the stimuli is perceived and you are able to capture that in the user experience research. So let's see here. The basic, pro and business. Now, how am I grouping it? So one way of designing is where you put these in certain blocks and put it down. Not necessarily you have to do that. You can also, without the box, just list them down. You already know from proximity, I will judge them together. You can also just use the same kind of colors, and again similarity will make them look as singular group. I can also in this case have this enclosure box, and that makes me look in a certain way. I can also use continuity. We follow the smoothest path. I can also use figure and ground over here. Now let's say you designed in this particular fashion. Now this gives me different kinds of input. It might make me feel that okay, I am already selected at pro and that's why that is big, or maybe the company is trying to tell me that pro is the most suitable option for you. So now this kind of layouting confuses people. I might also get confused that there are certain layers over here and there are only two, but that is business, that is more dollars. Why it only has two features just like the other one? In order to create a good perception, you need to follow a design where there is certain kind of continuity. So you can have, so you might have 20 different features, all 20 are available in business, but only 10 are available in basic and 15 in pro. Try to list down all of them. You can gray out the ones which are not available to people or put a cross mark to denote what is not present at basic level. Now coming to attention is selective. So when you are doing this user research, people with whom you are doing this user research, they have selective attention. So users notice only a fraction of an interface. What they miss is data and not your failure. So when you are trying to do this user experience research, you are trying to identify what is it that users are missing and was it an important part of your design, and then how can you make people not miss on to that. So let's say, for example, you identify that 6 of 10 testers miss the transfer link in the footer and assume the feature isn't in the app. So it is not the problem of the user, it is the problem of your interface. So let's look at this particular interface. So when I look at this interface, I get to know by looking at this lady that this is something about exercise, and it will tell me how many calories did I burn today, and I can do my start free trial, and the no credit card required is also placed very close to each other. So what I am doing is users notice only a fraction of what's on the screen. Design competes for attention. What stands out and gets seen, what doesn't gets ignored. So I have designed this page considering which is the places where users' attention goes most. So mostly people who belong to the English reading regions of the country or similar other languages wherein the reading happens from left to right and top to bottom, the left top corner has a very high importance. Then comes the importance of this region is the second. Then comes the importance of this region, which is the center region. Now I know about this positionality. I also know that I can drag attention to certain things by using certain kind of contrast, certain kind of colors. So as you can see, as soon as I land onto this particular website, I see this big image of a person plus a 312 calories today. superimposed on top of her. I wouldn't have noticed this if I were not noticing the woman over here. So in order to create this emphasis over here that this app can do multiple things, it can help train smarter, but it also tells you about certain calories and certain graphs, I have used this technique. I know this is a place where people will look, so I have put the branding over there. In case I want to know something more, like what are the other features, so you can see feature 1, personalized plan, track progress, and expert guidances are all put. They have used certain kind of icons over here to do that in order to drag your attention, because as I told you, this is the first place, this is the second place, and this is the central place where your attention lies. My attention will not go over here. In order to bring in my user's attention over there, I have given this treatment out here. Now coming to perception sets expectations. So salience, contrast, and layout steer first impression and where users believe functions live. So if you look at a large green continue button, it gets treated as the primary action even when save is intended. So let's look at this example. So here when you look at this first interface, I can see that this is first thing I will notice is okay, the task flow, because that's my eyes will go. Then there is a huge empty space and I see okay, I can create a new project and there are lots of other options. There is a save over here and there is a green save. I would hardly notice this save out there because this big save is something which attracts my attention. And this save is confusing. Why do I need to have one more save out there? What is it that it will save? So in case you wanted to make a difference, so let's say this save is for some other thing, so it is over there, and this one gives me an idea that it is about saving the project. There is still confusion. However, I know that there is a difference between the two saves. If I have to save the project, then this is about my save the project, and maybe in this screen this is the key task, and when I go to the next screen, when I do more activities in the project, then this is the save which stays highlighted and I can keep saving it. And maybe if I press saved over here also, it might not cause much problem. In this particular case, because these words are setting some confusing meanings to the users, I can think of, let's say, change the naming. So maybe I can add over here continue, and then people get to understand that okay, that button has a different purpose. So I saved the project and I want to continue with the project. So rather than the save, I can actually replace it with a continue over there. Now visual perception, it also has a bias for risk for researchers. So your visual reading of a screen differs from the participants. So I am a researcher, I also have my vision, and I will see different things as compared to what my participant is doing. So observe carefully, do not assume. You spot the help icon instantly and the participant scans for 12 seconds and never lands on it. It is pretty possible, and that's what our aim for user research is, that researcher or the designer has their own biases. They also designed it, they also decided I want to put it there as like that, but your participant might not be able to find it. So let's say, for example, since I have designed this, so I will say, oh, okay, my whole aim was to do this book now. So I place the book now at 2 different. But when I do eye tracking testing to understand what my user is actually seeing, I see that as soon as they landed on this page, mostly their focus was over here and over here on the deals part of it. So I get to know that okay, although I designed it considering that book now are the 2 points that are the most important, that's why I also offered them twice on the same screen, but user is not actually looking at book now, they are looking at somewhere else. So this user experience test of eye tracking should be able to tell you the difference between how you are seeing the interface and how your users are seeing the interface. Now when you are you going to do research, you can follow certain research tactics. So you can control the test material. So say for example, keep the color, contrast and layout consistent across conditions. So you test the design and not the visual noise. So test two navigation variants on the same grayscale wireframe, so color can't confound the result. And then once you are sure about that particular variable, then keep that variable constant, and now you can change the colors. Make looking observable. So use eye tracking, first click test and 5-second test to capture where the attention landed. So run a 5-second test on the landing page, then ask participants to recall the headline and primary content of that particular page. You can also use probe about missed elements. So when users overlook a feature or diagnose it as a figure ground or salience effect. So if users miss the filter button sitting on a similarly toned panel, treat it as a low contrast and not as user error. Ask about noticing. So pair observation with questions like what did you see first to surface perceptual order. So after a task, ask what stood out first on this screen before asking what did you click. So you may also ask like, okay, I saw that you went to this particular banking web page and you clicked onto this particular icon to log in. What made you feel that that particular icon will take you to the login page? So you are now trying to understand what meant to the user. The user might say, okay, there was no other button, only this button. So I thought maybe by pressing it, I can go inside. Or maybe you designed a new kind of a login, which looks like a lock. And the user says, oh, it's a lock. And it seemed to me like just like to enter my house, I have to use a key. So I went over there to put in my password. So ask these questions and it becomes more clear that what was in your mind when you were designing that particular feature is in alignment what your user is saying. You can also ask them whether it was confusing, whether they were trying to look for the usual login button, because here you just remove the text login. So the eyes don't just see, it interprets, it predicts and fills in the information. Design with that active vision in your mind. The key takeaways from this particular lecture are these. So vision is active and is not a passive process. Users sample the interface in sachets, brief fixations through a narrow phobia. Design for where the eye lands, not what the screen contains. Color is relative and cultural. Color reads against its context and varies by culture and ability. Use limited palettes, sufficient contrast and never rely on color alone. Try to use it in combination with icons and text as far as possible. Perception steers interpretation. So gestalt, grouping, salience and hierarchy shape what users believe before they reason. So layout decisions are research variables and you need to test whether they are working or not working. Always observe carefully, do not make assumptions. What a participant sees differs from what you as a designer or a researcher are seeing. Control your stimuli, make looking observable and probe what gets missed. Why did it get missed and why did you choose to select that one over something else? That's how we operationalize it when we are conducting a user research. So that brings us to the end of this lecture. Here are some of the references for you. I will see you in the next lecture when we will be talking about cognitive load and user interface design. See you then.